All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So first I want to kind of introduce just myself and Michael on the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So we have Michael Carroll, who is the head of product over at Baton. Baton is a customer implementation software solution. I'll let Michael mention a little bit more about what they do. And we're going to be talking all about time to value and how you can kind of maximize, accelerate your time to value and strategies for how you can leverage time to value to drive business growth, especially in today's environment, given focus on kind of customers, retention, renewals, expansion revenue. First impressions mean a lot, and there's a lot of impact that folks in revenue operations can have on those first impressions. So we're going to be focusing on kind of time to value and get some kind of tips, tricks, and strategies from Michael and kind of the experts from Baton. And so with that, Michael, actually maybe give us a quick intro on yourself and maybe tell us a little bit more about Baton, and then I'll kind of pull up some slides and we can kind of start to get to the discussion here.
Yeah, thank you. So like Matt said, my name is Michael. I'm head of product here at Baton. Baton is focused on really the implementations post a sale before a CSM really steps in for getting your software or whatever you're working with up and running for your customer. We really focus on having a project management system that works not only for you as a seller of software typically, but also your client, and getting that transparency and that communication all in one place. We know that can be messy. Typically it lives in a bunch of random emails. So we're trying to make a platform to scale that. I've been doing product for about 6-7 years now. Before that, my background was data science and stats is my background academically. So time to value is super interesting for me because it is such a key metric here, but it is also, it is a metric, it needs to be measured, it needs to be shown. So a lot of what we're trying to do is have a platform that can do everything I said before, but also measure success and iterate from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I love that as well. And I know I've been kind of impressed with not only the Baton product, but obviously all the expertise that you all bring and kind of have in this area. So, maybe the first thing that we can just talk about to make sure that we're all kind of starting from the same spot is, what is time to value? And obviously it's one of those things that can probably differ, or I'm guessing should differ, right, from company to company. But give us a little bit of your perspective on, I mean, y'all are the experts here, right? So what is time to value? How can we apply maybe some definition framework to each of our own individual circumstances, right? The companies that we're currently working at, how can we measure, define our own kind of unique time to value?
Yeah, so time to value breaks down into two things. The first is the time aspect. The second is the value. The time is actually straightforward. It's the date the value is realized from when the deal is sold. So you have a customer and they get back to you after all this redlining and all this stuff with your sales team. As soon as they sign the contract, that's when the clock starts. And then the time aspect goes until value is realized. Now, what is value? That's going to vary pretty much for everyone here. Value can be said in a lot of different ways. I think the most typical you hear is the aha moment, but it's when the reason why someone is buying your product is for the first time seen. It could be when something finishes. It could be when automations kick in. It could be a bunch of different things, but it's that time where the customer says, okay, I'm now comfortable and happy that I bought your product because of this value I'm seeing. And time to value is just measuring when that happens. One goal that pretty much universally exists in implementations is minimizing that time. What you don't want to do is have a salesperson come in, maybe even a sales engineer, all these folks come in, get a customer really excited, and then say, okay, now wait 9 months or wait 10 months or whatever. You want to get that time down. Hurry up and wait is a common phrase we've heard about this. That's kind of a frustration for folks in charge. So really what we're trying to do is measure and then reduce the time from when a sale is completed to when that aha moment first exists and comes into play. And again, that'll vary for your product.
Yeah. And so what are, I don't know, I'm thinking of, I mean, you all, well, can you maybe give some examples, at least some real examples of, I mean, maybe your own, like your own customers. What are, like, how do you all apply this notion of time to value to the customers that, you know, that you sell to, that you onboard, right? So if you're, you know, say selling software technology, you know, what are some examples maybe of that aha moment, like some real concrete things that you're like, oh yeah, like this is how we're going to define value, and then, you know, you kind of measure the time it takes to get them there.
Yeah, so automations is a big one. So when in automation, especially if there's, you know, APIs back and forth that need to be set up, et cetera, are actually flowing and moving information back and forth. The funny thing is we actually, we have a product, we have a feature in our product that allows users to measure time to value both at the template and the project level for each implementation. And, you know, we initially set it because you have to have a default as the project start and the project end. That's typically your time to value. And when I say project, I'm speaking in baton terms, so very implementation focused. What we found, which was quite interesting, was we allowed for a lot of overrides for these, and most of them are being used. Could be custom fields that people have for dates and things on projects, but often this time to value is different based on a different milestone being completed or a different task being completed, et cetera. One thing that's interesting too is we found that the beginning of the project is pretty universal. It's typically the kickoff. It's when you obviously want to minimize the gap between a contract being signed and when a kickoff happens. Maybe there's some information to gather, et cetera. But really the end is what's super unique to every different customer. We find, again, automations, things going live. We find actually having your users be able to log in and invite not only the champion on the client side or the customer side, but them inviting their team as well, and actually being able to see there. So it's more just, again, realizing that value that, okay, I've paid money to a vendor, now I realize the value and now I see it. And some people even can see it theoretically, but start to set up and go forward. And that's kind of more on the launch side. Others will go even further and say when they're actually seeing the value and they're actually seeing a positive ROI from their purchase already.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I guess my last question for you on this before we kind of move on to the kind of the next kind of element of this topic is a lot of what you're talking about. I'm thinking to you know, the sales process, right? Identify, like you have it here, right? The need is identified, you know, the deal is sold, right? People buy software or buy things to solve their problems, not because of specific, call it features that exist within your product. So is part of the element here of, you know, defining value, knowing that it's subjective and kind of varies, is there some element here of understanding the problem that someone is looking to solve with your product, and essentially, you know, call it like the feature set or the things that you're going to turn on, the things that you'll deploy that are part of your implementation that will kind of be the first element or aspect, I guess, of solving that problem? Because I look at the solution as being something that you know, would be like happen over a range of time, right? Not necessarily like a finite like point in time. So is there some exercise there of kind of mapping that stuff together or not?
Yeah, I mean, first off, you said a few key things there that I think I want to touch on. What is value is very, very, very difficult to define. Like you said, it could be one thing. It could be you start to see a repeated action over and over from a software. Defining that for your company is something that sales leaders, product leaders should really get together and typically define together, and try and say, what is that value point? It could be multiple. We've heard some people who have multiple times to value. The second thing you also mentioned is sales. I think that's something that sometimes gets a little bit overlooked by a lot of people in the marketplace today. Really, the two most important relationships for a vendor who is selling software is first to their customer, to their client, and trying to keep that on track. It's quite interesting. We have in Baton a way to predict when things will get completed, as in the implementation is done. We also have sentiment of the customer. We find those are actually not quite correlated. If you are a good project manager, you can have a project be super delayed, but it's fine because the customer's happy or they're being communicated with. The real reason I want to dive into that though is sales, which the relationship between an implementation team and a sales team is vastly overlooked nowadays. The main reason why is you see a lot of times where what is sold is not maybe what's out of the box. You'll see people with gold, silver, bronze plans or things like that. But we know that sales are not perfectly into those buckets, and 20, 30%, if not more, are we'll give you the bronze plan plus this, or we'll give you a deal here or there, things to get across the finish line. So you can get handed off effectively to an implementation team is super, super important, because that can reduce the time to value. The reason why there is if you don't know what you're implementing, because things have changed and kind of gone from the cookie cutter to something a little bit more custom, that time to value takes longer because part of that time that's baked in is you understanding what was actually sold. So understanding the sales team and everything there, and just having that handshake is super important to time to value.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I've seen the handoff process, especially. I mean, again, communication there is key, and again, the like first impressions mean a lot, and you want to make sure that you provide a positive one to those new customers. So on the I guess when it comes to challenges, I know we've hit on some of this already. I mean, we talked about, again, kind of value being subjectives, highly subjective. We've talked about, again, how this can vary from kind of team to team, how it might be difficult to measure, but talk about some of the challenges, I guess, that you see here with time to value, and then maybe we can get into some of the solutions, right? How you can kind of solve for some of those challenges as well.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like I mentioned before, value is really the difficult part here. The time, to dates, it's fairly straightforward. But what is the value of your product is actually a quite difficult question. You think we can all answer that really quickly, and the problem is that's an abstraction that you're trying to put on to a specific date. So that's something that is always one to be a challenge. We find for our customers, even setting this up is quite difficult. Some of the best ways you talked about tips and tricks is really just to talk to your current customers, especially folks who have just renewed. I know it's a little bit later at that point, but if you find folks that have renewed or are continuing to use your product, they're doing it for a reason. They found some value. There's a reason why they're paying money. There's an ROI that's positive. They're not just throwing money at you. So a lot of what we've done is just said, why do you buy our product? What do you use it for? And when they give answers, you can typically find patterns and things there that, oh, if it weren't for feature X, I wouldn't be able to do my day job, or I'd have to work an extra 8 hours a month or something like that. We had one example where for us, we had status reports is a huge aha value for us, or aha moment for us. And we had a customer or have a customer that said, look, every Wednesday afternoon from noon to 6 p.m., I just sat and wrote status reports. I can now do that in 15 minutes with Baton. So that value was enough to say, we basically cut a half day of work out for their PMs every week. That's one time to value that we really look at and say, when are things set up enough where they can now send status reports? But it's simple conversations and back and forth. And frankly, it's been quite straightforward to talk to our users, and they've been, what they're thanking us for and talking about is normally what you can find right away, some value in.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, even if, like you said, I mean, talking to them at renewal time, while might be, call it a year later, still tons of insights that you can get to make sure you're measuring things for your new customers, right? The ones you're bringing on board now, in the right way. And I guess last question on this before I move on to the next one is, so should folks be, for folks that might be looking at, like, okay, I have we have no element of time to value today. Is value something that they should be looking at from an organization perspective? Meaning, at my company XYZ, we define value of our product as getting people to this. Or should value be defined on like a customer to customer basis of like, oh, well, value for this customer is getting them the status report stuff as quickly as they can because that was the reason why they bought status. But value for this customer might be a specific integration that now automates a bunch of workflows and eliminates a bunch of like manual time. So should it be company-wide, organization-wide, or should value be customer specific?
It's a mix of both. The main thing that you want to do for your customers is understand that North Star value that you're providing for them. And that will relate back down to features. So like you mentioned, maybe there's an API that's connected, et cetera. So that feature for that customer makes sense. And typically you will find it has to be customized by customer or even plan, or, maybe you can generalize like that. However, on the flip side, you do need to keep in mind that North Star of why are you building your product? Why are people buying your product? Are there things like, when I talk about Baton, I talk about transparency, communication. I mentioned status reports for a specific customer, that's their feature. But at the end of the day, it's a transparency tool. And that high level North Star of transparency and communication is our value realized by that feature of status reports. So it kind of goes both ways. The high level one should be company-wide. That's going to be universal for pretty much everyone while you're selling your product. But you will need to get specific and kind of tailor to different customers as it goes.
Makes sense. And I would say too, like for folks out there who may not have a definition of value today, start with one, right? So company-wide, organization-wide. Don't try to go straight into defining this for every single customer that you have. And then we can talk about, we'll provide some insight on how you might be able to measure that. So makes a lot of sense. So all right, so we talked about time to value a little bit. We've also talked about some of the challenges around kind of measuring that, the fact that it's based on things like customer usage, more representation of like the product efficacy. So let's talk a little bit about time to launch. So tell us, what is time to launch? How does it vary from time to value? And then how do these two things play together, if they do at all?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, my background is data science, and something with data is you need to have typically a responsibility for every metric assigned to one person. So you can say this, metric A is to person one, metric B is to person two, et cetera. The reason why is then you can measure and have someone control a specific metric, as opposed to having a team where it's kind of murky. So the reason we came up with time to launch wasn't to replace time to value, but it was to break it down further. We recognized from doing some research that there's kind of two major players after a sale that are key to the time to value. The first is the implementation team. And they're the ones who are getting the handoff from sales, doing the initial setup, setting up APIs, all that fun stuff. And the second is often the CSM, who's taking over the account, managing it, even looking at renewals long-term, but kind of getting to that point of value. And when a project or a software launches or goes live, that may be different than the value you get from it. So as an example, maybe you set up all the APIs, data's flowing, but maybe you have to run a project that takes 3 months with the software you bought in order to see the value. Mm-hmm. So the reason we have time to launch is to kind of break time to value up into two different things. We're actually telling our customers to not only measure time to launch, which we provide in Baton, but also measure the time from launch to value. Because from where your product is set up to when you get value is also another thing you want to potentially minimize and move down. So time to launch was basically a way to identify a single team, which is implementation teams, to control what they can control. And then again, focus on that launch to value, which is potentially a CSM thing, but also could be even product as well, because a lot of times product improvements can help that launch to value delta. Yeah. So essentially this was a way to break down and have people control what they can control and not what they can't.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I will second what you said on the one owner to one metric as well. At RevOps Co-op, we're all about kind of setting OKRs, goals, objectives, key results. Previously, I was leading BizOps at an OKR software company. And so, so naturally, that's kind of ingrained in the way that we work. But what we've seen there as well, right, is like you want one person to own one thing. It can be really, really easy to be like, oh, well, Matt and Michael got to team up on this thing, right? So like, assign them both. But then, if you kind of wind up with, say, challenges, or if things go really well, right? You're like, okay, well, who do I go to, right? At the end of the day, Matt and Michael might start pointing fingers at the other. So like have one person, right? And I know it sounds easier said than done, right? But yeah, make sure one person, one metric, make sure it's clear that they own that, they're responsible for that. It'll be much easier to manage the process. And so time to launch, I guess, makes complete sense. So I guess, before we talked about the definition of value being subjective, how does that compare to the definition of launch? And like, to me, I hear launch, I think of like go live. And so this is like when, you at your company are able to hand off your, call it your product to your customer, and it is ready for use for the first time. Is that is that a fair definition of launch? How would you define launch? And if you compare it to value, is this one of those things that is squishy, subjective, or is this kind of more cut and dry?
It's funny you say go live, because that was what I was going to actually say as another example for launch. It can be squishy. Really what we're thinking about when we think about launch is when people besides the champion can be invited, involved in the product. It's usually when things are set up and you can have invites and everything internally to that customer. Ironically, we do find sometimes where this is inverted and the value is sometimes realized before the full launch, maybe if there's iterative values, et cetera, especially because, like I mentioned before, there can be multiple times to value. So, if it's, say, a dashboarding software, getting the first one up and filling it could be a value that's great and actually happens before the full launch. But the final value, and the one that's really the aha, is getting 100 projects in, so you can actually analyze and do the math there. So think of like a BI tool or something like that. So the launch is usually just, when is it software complete? When is it from an engineering standpoint done being implemented? That's kind of what we think of as a launch. Though we are flexible, and again, that's why we build a lot of our features around this to be super flexible for our users, and even allow custom fields and things like that so they can use them if they want, because we realize that it's going to vary pretty universally. We found quite different across different customers.
Yeah. And I like what you laid out here, comparing kind of customer journey versus internal team and technology. And so it sounds like, again, if we're looking at generalizations, again, every company will, kind of be unique and have their own journey, team, tech stack. But generally, you're looking at, kind of launch as, again, something like a go live date where you get more than just your champion kind of into your product or your offering. Typically, it sounds like that's still, I guess, owned by the implementation team, and they're kind of in this process of maybe handing things off to the CSM or the person who ultimately managed the relationship. And then on the technology side, obviously there's tools, there's software to support folks on the implementation side, like Baton. And I would imagine that other things in the mix on the tech stack side, and probably that you've seen, I'm sure your customers maybe migrating from, I know what I've experienced in the past are, the good old like Gantt charts in Google Sheets. You've got projects and things and tools like Asana or Trello. There's probably a bunch of spreadsheets in the mix I already mentioned, but my guess is those are some of the common call it tools, technology that are kind of trying to connect the dots here and help measure these things.
Yeah, and a lot of what we're trying to do is shine a light on this too, because some people don't have implementation teams versus CS teams. It's all the same team. A question we often get in sales calls for Baton is, so you're trying to replace Salesforce, or are you trying to replace some CSM tool? The way we think about it is, no, this is actually something that is in between the CSM teams and the sales teams that are just not getting a lot of love, and is actually a quite personal problem and a quite human problem. So getting that launch up is super important, not only for all the software things that I mentioned, getting off the ground, but also there is a human element of it's jarring for a customer to go from a salesperson who they talk to for potentially months to buy enterprise software and go on. And if you're handed to a CSM, you're skipping a step, you're skipping this implementation. And that can potentially be a wrong foot to get off on, which can hurt even renewal downhill or down the road.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're trying to do is, again, shine the light to the implementation and say, no, let's spend some time here. And if you do it right, you'll get those renewals, you'll have those relationships, et cetera.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, I guess so when it comes to, probably the most, I mean, what I would guess, and actually maybe this will be my next question for you, is like, to me, when I think about, things that impact, time to value, time to launch, it's the time element, right? And delays on time, regardless of probably the reason why there are delays. I imagine that's the biggest driver here. But what are, I guess, what are some common, call it pitfalls, challenges, right? Things that impact kind of time to launch, and then what are some things that people can do to solve for those things?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one that we've seen is just the sales team, the implementation team, and the client not being on the same page. I think all of us probably in this call in one way or another have purchased software or been in a sale for a large enterprise software purchase. And we know there's always, okay, we'll change this around or we'll give you this deal or whatever. In other words, it's not 2-3 buckets. It's really every customer is custom. The problem with that, though, is that's easy to agree on in a sales call. That's hard to communicate and implement down the road, especially with templates, et cetera. So making sure that everyone's on the same page is super difficult and something that it's kind of worth it to recognize. I think also when a sale is done, a lot of sales organizations, they basically the way incentives are set up is to go on to the next sale. So there's not a lot of work to finish the implementation or work there. So making sure that that's set up as it goes and can, set the implementation team up for success. On the flip side, I think the relationship between the implementation team and the client is the biggest one. And we really find two types of kickoff meetings when an implementation starts. The first is essentially what we kind of refer to as like a DMV type thing. You're asking for information that everyone knows. What's your name? What's your height? What's your weight? I'm like, I've renewed my license 5 years ago. I didn't grow between them. A lot of times that's the relationship that is the implementation team to the client, where they're like, I just explained this all to the salesperson. Why am I repeating myself? So a lot of what you want to do is make it so you're in that kickoff meeting, kicking off. You're setting, here's the goals we're setting. Here's your OKRs. Here's, whatever it may be. OKRs are a good one to have for that as a tip. But really what you want to do is set that meeting as a kickoff, where we're going to write down what we're doing together, but you're coming in informed and knowing what's going on. Some of that could be quizzing the sales team. Some of that could be even a form beforehand to your client to just kind of clarify some things, maybe different systems they use, et cetera. Are they using Mac versus Windows or what have you? But the goal there is a kickoff meeting should be about building a relationship, not about getting information you've never seen before. We see time and time again, it's, hey, can you essentially fill out this form in front of us? And that's going to set up a client for frustration and failure, because they're like, I just spent 3 months in a sales cycle. I've explained all of this, and now you're asking, me to explain it again. Whereas the salesperson's like, well, I was on a call for 10 hours. If you add them all together, I can't call that. That's crazy and ridiculous. So how do you pick and choose when to ask your sales team and the client from an implementation perspective, and make that initial call about, let's meet each other, let's be humans together, let's actually build that relationship? That's what makes a successful implementation.
Yeah, and I know some of the I know you mentioned one of the big things about templates, and I know I've seen this in the Baton product. A lot of what you guys do is just provide people with the ability to templatize things to ensure that standard processes are followed. But outside of the implementation process, outside of Baton, like I can't stress enough how important like templatizing things is. And again, like for everyone out there, like you probably have tools and things available right now that you can start to work on, like building out a templated process. I know one of the things that I did previously at Ally, the OKR software company I mentioned, was just a templated Google Doc with a bunch of things that the sales rep would need to kind of complete and fill out, essentially in order to move a deal to kind of close one. And then that would have to be included in the actual kind of handoff email to the assigned CSM or implementation team. And that ensured that a lot of the call it the common knowledge or the shared knowledge, right? Those things that like the salesperson learned during the sales process, the things they communicated, the things they promised, right, are getting communicated to the CSM, the implementation person. And then, like you said, what the implementation team can do when they hold that, that first meeting, that kickoff call, is one, they can share that information in advance with the customer, right? Ask for them to review it, to confirm a lot of the things that are there. And then you can use that first meeting to, kind of go over the things that, that need discussion, right? And as opposed to like an intake meeting, which again, like we've all been in those personally and professionally, and no one wants to repeat themselves. That is just a giant, colossal waste of time. So, look at the things that you can do today to templatize the handoff process, the documentation process, the things that are required to, again, like move deals to close one, to create the renewal opportunity in Salesforce, whatever it is. Because those things, like foreseeing that standardized process, like that is definitely the area to start. That's the low-hanging fruit. Like if you haven't gotten out there, I know that's what I've seen in the past.
And something that, to build on that, not a lot of people do, and we actually do natively in Baton, just with our data structure, is we capture every project and where it's created from. A common thing that we find when talking to folks when they're trying to analyze their templates and things like that and see what works and what doesn't, is they're actually not tracking what template a project is created from. Realistically, one template is not going to work for your team. You're going to need to have either custom ones, maybe again, buckets like, gold, silver, bronze, or something like that. So every time you create a project in Baton, we actually capture it was created from the bronze project down to the task level. This task relates to this other task on the template. And that's a way to set up not only that personal relationship, but also then bring the analytics in on the back end or on the more admin end, where you can see, this task is taking too long, or this task is going quickly, and kind of analyze from there. Is it a relationship thing? Is it just, we thought that was going to take 2 hours, it takes 8 hours type of work? But that template to project relationship is super important, a little bit separate from time to value, but just recognizing where in your process there are bottlenecks, et cetera.
Yep. 100%. And so I guess we hit on this a little bit about streamlining the process with technology. I think typically the first thing that I look at is, again, like start with the current tools, the current things you have access to, right? Like if you don't have things in place today, figure out a way to measure time to launch like tomorrow, which is essentially just the difference between two dates, right? If we boil it down to like the most basic, the most basic element is like, how much time does it take you to get from point A to point B? Like if you need to throw that stuff on a spreadsheet, like set up a really basic formula, like manually input it. If you want, evolve, get more sophisticated from there. But I guess, what are some of the things, Michael, that you've seen, and two, I would say, like, that works and that doesn't work before folks implement a product like Baton, before they, kind of deploy an implementation solution? What are some things that that you all have seen outside of your product that, like I said, have actually worked, have helped people, kind of manage these things relatively well or effectively? And what are some things to just avoid when it comes to like process and technology? Like just don't even go down that path.
Yeah, there's two main issues that come out without having an implementation specific solution. The first is, I mean, sometimes you don't even realize the revenue. There are customers who will, I think it's not high, but we found anywhere between 7 and 17% who just say, we're done. Like we knew it was a 4-month implementation. This is not going where we're going. We wanted this value. We signed the contract 3 months ago. I know you say a month left. We don't have faith. We're out, and walk away. And the second is related to churn, which is kind of similar on that. But if you don't get off on the right foot and you don't have a positive CSM relationship, you will ultimately probably churn. Customers will forget the value if it's not there for you, and if you're not, checking in with them regularly. Something we do internally is we have a review, and we rank every current customer from a red, yellow, green. Of red is we have concerns, here's why. Yellow is some concerns, here's why. And green is, we think we're in a good spot. But even the greens we're checking in on regularly, and we're having talks with regularly. There's no one who treat differently. It's more just from an internal standpoint. So having that kind of analysis is super important. And really, if you don't implement correctly, you're pretty much going to start off with a yellow, if not worse, in that scale, just because they've probably had a few months of frustration of, again, repeating things they thought they said to sales, et cetera. And a lot of what we're looking at from a baton standpoint is, how do we communicate effectively that it's spending money to make money? Yes, it's a platform and another tool, and we all have CRM tools, we all have CSM tools, but if you can reduce churn in a year from, say, 17 to 7% or even lower, which we found from some of our customers, like, you're actually essentially taking a smoking hot lead instead of a warm or a cold lead and maintaining that revenue. And I think everyone here probably knows, or has an inkling, that a cold lead is hard to work. A warm lead is hard to work. A current customer is, they're set up, they know what they're doing, but you have to make sure that current customer is in a healthy place, in a good state. And skipping this implementation step is often one that just gets people off on the wrong foot and gets them down to red very quickly, which is one we want to try and help avoid.
Yeah. I think one of the things that one of the things that comes to mind there. So you mentioned obviously two big, call it business drivers of where call it dedicated technology can help. Faster revenue recognition, right? Meaning as a company, you're able to start to recognize revenue more quickly. So naturally, right, that's going to be a month in advance, 2 months in advance, whatever it might be, before you would. That's obviously going to be something that provides business value. The second is going to be improved renewal rates, retention rates, ability to upsell, expand. And so one of the things that comes to mind, for folks out there today, I would say that may not have a dedicated tool or solution, is if you've got a manual process, kind of in place, or even if you're able to just like manually measure things like time to launch, look at how you can kind of measure time to launch for, I don't know, take all the customers that you launched this past quarter, right? We're into, mid-April, right? Look at everyone that launched in Q1, or maybe, Q1 of last year, right? Something where you can, get a good enough data set together, look at the time to launch and start to compare those to, maybe the existing account status that your implementation CSM team might have, see how those map to customers that are green, yellow, or red. And then if you have the ability to actually measure time to launch for, say, some recent renewals or folks that came up for renewal and churn, actually start to map the time to launch against those renewals to see who actually renewed, who expanded, and who churned. And my guess is you'll probably start to unearth some patterns there that, again, can drive a business case for actually investing in technology to support this area of your business. And for anyone in RevOps, right, you look at anything that touches the CRM is obviously going to like naturally involve folks in revenue operations. But again, revenue operations is supposed to be the glue that holds the entire go-to-market engine together. And I think given especially the current macro macro climate that's out there today, folks understand like go to market is truly marketing, sales, and success post sales, right? We can't forget about that last piece, and I think that's where investing in the time to produce these analytics, to understand the data, to invest in the technology, the teams that are there can have huge impact.
It's funny you mentioned upsell in that, by the way. We obviously you want to upsell, you want to move your customers along, but one thing that we believe, and we talk a lot about internally at Baton, is how do we move folks? We actually classify our customers into one of 4 stages. The 4th stage being sort of mature, probably a public company with a huge implementation team. The 1st stage being a Series A company. And a lot of what we want to do is move people along that spectrum quickly, and having it so using Baton, using our product moves it there. So from a feature set perspective, when I'm thinking about what we prioritize, it's a big thing there. And a lot of what you're talking about of moving that forward and having analytics and everything there, that's what moves a Series A company to the next stage of now they can look internally and say, here's the bottleneck, here's what's working, here's what's not. And it is one of the biggest problems that everyone has, but to be honest, nobody has time to look at ever. We actually initially shipped it, and we had to find that we had to do reminder emails, et cetera, for that, because people weren't looking at it just because they don't have the time, which is understandable. But how do you do that and upsell and move forward with your customers is super important, just to make sure you mature with them.
Yeah. And I know this is here kind of a view, and we talked a little about on this already, but a view into, kind of the from and to points in terms of how to calculate, at least within the Baton product. But what are some examples of like from your own customers and even yourself, right, of how of how how you see folks kind of measuring the time to launch? It looks like here at least, right, you can pick kind of a project start date, maybe a milestone date, maybe a certain task that gets completed, maybe it's some custom date field, right, whatever it might be. And then you're measuring the two in terms of the launch of, again, projects, project end date, right? Maybe when things are totally wrapped up and you hand things off to the customer success person. Maybe there's a milestone date, meaning like, hey, at this point, you're able to invite people outside of the champion that are in there. Maybe it's a task completion date. I don't know if that's like a, we've got this integration kind of go live, whatever it might be. But what are some specific examples of the from and to, kind of dates that you see people using in terms of kind of measuring the launch? And then I've got some, actually, maybe it's this next slide that I have here on, some like, real world, kind of concrete examples.
Yeah. So first off, this turned into a very complex feature. As you see, it's 5 types of dates to 5 types of dates, as simple as enter your own date to a project date, a milestone, a task, really drilling down there. We view time to launch as something that is unique per customer. And you can see this is all real data that we pulled from our product of how folks are using it today. And frankly, we use our own product. We would be kind of hypocrites not to. But one thing that we do is time to launch, we measure for new employees. So when we hire, we actually consider the launch when they're ready to start. So they have their laptop, their email set up, they're on all the systems they need to be on, et cetera. That's not the value. They still need to have one-on-ones and get oriented and all that. That's, later on. But from an HR perspective, we say that time to launch is they can put their butt in their seat and have a good day. The value side is, again, they're now ready to be a full-time employee, be it, there's obviously engineering code you may need to learn or drop on certain themes and things like that. But like, what's the universal things? That's kind of our value. As far as our current customers, you see a lot of different things here. You see kickoffs, you see project start dates as how to start it. Like I've mentioned a few times, the relationship and that call that kicks everything off is really, really important. As far as the end, it's is it a check-in? Like you see the fourth one down is leadership satisfaction, just saying, are people satisfied? The fifth one down is about, I know that's a customer that actually mails physical mail out, which you specify nowadays, but when they're actually mailing the products out. And the middle one, sorry, now I'm jumping around, the active revenue date. That's a company that doesn't charge on sale closed, it charges revenue on launch. So just actually realizing revenue, which for a CFO is massive, is huge for them. So we see a huge wide variety, but we know that from our customers, almost everyone's using this feature, but they're all using it differently, which speaks to how important it is and how unique you will be for it. I know for us internally, we've also looked at that aha moment and everything. And it took, we got the leadership team together. We did an offsite. We talked for, 8 hours and went back and forth and had lunch together and all this fun stuff, because that aha moment is going to be hard to find. And really knowing what your customers need and get out of the product is super important. I would say as a tip, if you do that, talking to folks, especially who have renewed, is super important. Plus, the other thing we do is we cross-reference that with people who've never even heard of us. We try and find interviews with either friends, family, or through paid sites, etc. But see how folks would use us if they had heard of us and use it and go from there. So it's a variety of inputs, and it's not simple, but it's usually the way to really jumpstart your product.
Yeah, that's great. I like the the ones that I looked at here that at least resonated with me. Most of my experience being in kind of B2B SaaS, for that kind of initial kickoff call to the post-launch transition call. That one seems like a very logical one to me. Also in line with call it like a standardized templated process that you could drive for every implementation that you might have. And then like if I was especially in today's world, if I was like a CFO, the thing that I'm really going to care about is like how quickly can we get people to revenue recognition. So the time from when we hold that first kickoff call to the time that we start to recognize revenue, how long does that take? And what can we do to shorten that cycle without actually impacting the experience, right? The implementation experience that we don't want to reduce the quality that we have there. And actually on that, so I know one last thing before we kind of get into wrap up is, again, we talked a lot about time to launch, time to value, accelerating things there, how we can improve the speed. We didn't necessarily talk about like quality of call it the implementation process, the experience, right? Like the faster you can do things, the better, right? Is obviously great, but you don't want to necessarily sacrifice quality in order to get there. So, what have you seen, or I guess, do you have any perspective on that, Michael, of, ensuring that you still have the, like the quality control aspect of the experience there, and that you're really improving the speed or the time aspect by, cutting out dead weight or things that, things that would otherwise take time that don't need to. How do you balance those two things, the time speed aspect and the quality aspect?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is looking at outcomes. So we've actually found some customers do very, very well who are almost always late. The reason why is the date you launch a product or find value in a product doesn't matter as much as, one, the reputation you have with your customer, and two, the kind of renewal value in what you actually add. The way that we've seen it is kind of we didn't mean it to be, but it ended up an experiment a little bit in our product, is you log into Baton, you see all your projects, and you see two columns, one of which is how everything is doing from a projected due date versus an actual due date. So if it's late, if it's early, etc. And that's red, yellow, green. You see a second one that's how is the customer sentiment? Are they happy or not? And we find that the are they happy or not is much, much, much bigger. as far as impact on renewal and all that stuff. And obviously the sentiment is related to the sentiment. But there's things like, for one example, we had a customer that had their client was in New Orleans and there was a hurricane and everything was super late because they left because of the hurricane, but it was communicated well. Everything finished with the pushes on time. And it was a super red, horrible on-time project from a template perspective. But because of good communication and that good relationship, they got renewals. And I think they just renewed for a second time, if I recall. And those are the things that really matter. So it's a matter of focusing on what will get you that renewal and what will get you that relationship that can set your CSM up for success, not about finishing on time, because that date actually matters to a certain extent. But, and we want to measure that and support it, but how they feel matters too.
Yeah. I think in all of this, you can't underestimate the value of the human to human aspect and the connection that that folks have with the people behind the tools, right? So whether it's Baton, whether it's spreadsheets, whether it's Asana, right? Like at the end of the day, you have a team, implementation team, customer success team working with your customers, and the relationship that they have and the communication that they have, like that's going to be such a big driver of those outcomes that you mentioned. Because even at the end of the day, if something's late, if something's behind, if you're communicating that, if you're upfront with it, if you're transparent, like if you're going through that with them, right, like people are going to feel appreciated. And honestly, like I've been through like so many implementations now on the customer side. It's kind of like if you choose to, like remodel or, like fix up your home, like you kind of just assume like, this is like, I want to get it done, in this much time and spend this much money, but I'm going to assume that I'm going to go over time and probably over budget. And so, but like, I don't want to be surprised necessarily, along the way. And I don't want to, if I'm working with a contractor or something, you definitely don't want to be surprised by them. And so same thing on the buyer side here is like, kind of have an expectation that, like any of these big projects, something's going to get in the way, right? Like that's my expectation, but I don't want to have someone try to hide that from me or kind of work around it, right? Communicate, be upfront, build that good relationship. That'll get you really, really far.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Awesome. Well, I think, we're coming up to top of the hour. I know we kind of talked about a lot of things around time to value, time to launch. I want to thank you, Michael, for joining, dropping us some knowledge on that today, sharing a little bit more about Baton, the product, the company, and kind of this topic on time to value, time to launch. For everyone who joined, thank you very much as well. We'll be following up with kind of recording some slides. If you want to get in touch with Michael or the crew at Baton, you can reach them at hellobaton.com. And Michael's email address is just michael@hellobaton.com as well. You can also find him on LinkedIn, find him in the RevOps Co-op Slack group as well. And with that, I will let you all run. Thank you again for joining. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you all on the flip side. So take care, y'all.